is God's roadmap for Israel and the church? These short Q&As will help guide you on your way. Supporters of the Palestinian cause name what happened in 1948 the Nakba, the catastrophe, in contrast to the War of Independence. Why is this?
Yes, two very different points of view. And by the way, we at Bridges for Peace are supporters of the Palestinian people, and we know that God wants the best for all peoples. The different points of view concern what or who is the cause of their catastrophe. So back to our story. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a further partition of Palestine, following the earlier formation of an Arab Jordan in 1920. The Jews accepted the 1947 plan and declared their independence. The Arabs rejected the plan and welcomed the armies of 5 surrounding Arab nations to roll in with their tanks and troops to destroy the brand new Jewish state. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq all attacked Israel. The catastrophe for the Arabs, or Palestinians as we now know them, was that many of them lost their homes in Israel, somewhere between 450,000 and 900,000. And they lost the war. Israel acknowledges moving a fraction of these, between 50 and 70,000, for strategic military reasons, but moving them only within the new Jewish state. The rest left voluntarily. Many of the rich and middle class left before the war even started, and a large number of the rest left at the instigation of their own leaders. The idea was to get out of the way of the fighting and come back when we win. There's a poignant story of how David Ben-Gurion, president of Israel, dispatched Golda Meir to Haifa to convince the large Arab population there to stay put, but she couldn't convince them. Their leaders advised them to flee. In 1980, this was acknowledged by the Arab National Committee of Haifa. They said the removal of the Arab inhabitants was voluntary and was carried out at our request. We proudly asked for their evacuation to neighboring Arab states. Another Arab source, the Institute for Palestinian Studies, concluded in a research paper that the majority of Arab refugees were not expelled and 68% of them left without seeing one Israeli soldier. Currently in Winnipeg, there's a large pressure campaign being directed at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to acknowledge the catastrophe of 1948 inflicted on the Palestinian people. What would such an exhibit look like? Would it acknowledge that the catastrophe was self-inflicted? Would it acknowledge that the Palestinians were offered a state of their own by the 1947 UN partition plan? Would it acknowledge that 5 Arab nations attacked Israel in order to destroy the Jewish people and their one-day-old state? Next time, we will look further into the refugee issue, which still exists today on the Palestinian side. We will also look at the hundreds of thousands of Jews who were driven out of their homes in Middle Eastern countries because of Arab fury at the new Jewish state. But one final note. In spite of the War of Independence, 160,000 Palestinians remained put in their homes in Israel. They were unharmed, and today their descendants number 2 million, with full rights of citizenship in the Jewish state.